will say, I wish.
Thou may ask anything of thy slave, master.
Yes, master? Those 3 words from Barbara Eden instantly transport you back to a pastel-colored world where magic lamps and space-age romance collided. But I Dream of Jeannie wasn't just a light-hearted 1960s sitcom. It was a volatile experiment in TV censorship, casting rivalries and production nightmares hidden beneath its whimsical exterior. Behind the sparkle of Jeannie's bottle, chaos brewed. Sets caught fire, tempers flared, and executives nearly pulled the plug more than once. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about I Dream of Jeannie that you didn't know. From secret on-set feuds to bizarre network restrictions, this is the story no laugh track could ever cover. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a revelation so strange it changes how you'll see the show forever. Let's rub the lamp and dive in. The show was created in jealousy of Bewitched. When NBC saw the massive ratings Bewitched pulled in for ABC in 1964, executives demanded their own magical sitcom. Sidney Sheldon, later a best-selling novelist, was tasked with whipping up a rival series in record time. His solution? Instead of a witch married to a mortal, he wrote about an astronaut and a genie. NBC hoped to siphon off ABC's audience with a copycat formula, but Sheldon insisted Jeannie would have her own quirks. Notably, Jeannie wasn't just magical. She was mischievous, jealous, and flirtatiously devoted to her master. The rivalry between the 2 shows wasn't just behind the scenes. For years, audiences debated which magical woman was more iconic, Elizabeth Montgomery's Samantha or Barbara Eden's Jeannie. What audiences didn't realize was that I Dream of Jeannie only existed because NBC couldn't stand losing to Bewitched's spellbinding ratings. Barbara Eden wasn't the first choice. Though Barbara Eden now seems inseparable from Jeannie, NBC initially wanted a brunette actress. Casting directors tested dozens of women, including soap opera star Gig Young's wife, actress Elaine Devry. The producers feared blondes were too obvious, and audiences would reject a stereotypical Jeannie look. But when Eden auditioned, everything changed. Her expressive face and sparkling energy won Sidney Sheldon over instantly. He later admitted, "The moment Barbara walked in, she was Jeannie." Ironically, Eden's blonde hair became one of the most defining aspects of the character, forever immortalizing her as the whimsical Jeannie in pink chiffon. What audiences didn't know, Eden's casting was considered a gamble at first, and many in the NBC boardroom doubted her. History proved them wrong. She became one of television's most beloved icons. Jeannie's costume was a censorship battlefield. Barbara Eden's Jeannie outfit, with its harem pants and crop top, may look tame today, but in 1965, it sparked heated battles with network censors. The biggest controversy? Her belly button, NBC's standards and practices. Office issued strict orders that Eden's navel could never be shown on camera. Producers used creative stitching, strategic veils, and camera angles to hide it. Even when Eden moved, fabric was adjusted to ensure no glimpse slipped through. The rules were so absurd that Eden once joked her midriff caused more meetings than the script. Years later, Eden famously revealed her navel on stage at an awards show as a cheeky nod to the ridiculous censorship. What audiences didn't know was that NBC spent years obsessing over her stomach, treating it like a national security issue. Larry Hagman was nearly fired multiple times. Before his fame as J.R. Ewing on Dallas, Larry Hagman played the charming astronaut Tony Nelson. But behind the scenes, Hagman clashed with producers constantly. He hated the show's direction, often argued with Sidney Sheldon, and sometimes showed up on set drunk. At one point, Hagman stormed into the studio wielding an axe, threatening to destroy the set if his demands weren't met. NBC executives seriously considered firing him, but Eden reportedly begged them to keep him on, fearing the show wouldn't survive without their chemistry. Hagman later admitted he was deeply unhappy during much of the show's run, calling it frustrating. The wild part? His unpredictable behavior nearly derailed filming on several occasions. What audiences didn't know was that the smiling astronaut on screen was played by an actor on the verge of collapse. The show recycled footage shamelessly. If you've ever noticed Jeannie's bottle popping open in the exact same way episode after episode, you weren't imagining things. To save money, NBC and Screen Gems reused the same stock shots again and again. The famous puff of pink smoke was recycled so often that eagle-eyed viewers could spot identical takes across entire seasons. Barbara Eden herself admitted she grew tired of reacting to the same visual insert. Production relied heavily on editing tricks to stretch the budget, meaning magical effects were often cut and paste repeats. While it added consistency to Jeannie's entrances, it also exposed how cheaply the show was made. What audiences didn't know, behind all the glitter, the show's magic was cobbled together from recycled film reels, not fresh special effects. Jeannie's bottle wasn't really exotic. The iconic bottle that Jeannie called home looked like an ancient relic, but in truth, it was nothing more than a repurposed Jim Beam liquor decanter. Originally released as a Christmas edition whiskey bottle in 1964, the container was spray-painted in rich colors and decorated with gold leaf to look like a mystical artifact. The prop department loved it because it was lightweight and easy to replicate if broken. Barbara Eden once joked that Jeannie was the only genie who lived in a bourbon bottle. Over time, the bottle design became one of the most recognizable props in TV history, so much so that fans begged for replicas. What audiences didn't know, Jeannie's home wasn't magical at all. It was a recycled liquor bottle hiding in plain sight. Barbara Eden was pregnant during season 1. When I Dream of Jeannie began shooting, Barbara Eden was secretly pregnant. The production team faced a dilemma: how to film a genie in a revealing costume without showing her growing belly. The solution? Clever camera angles, veils, and a specially modified costume designed to disguise her figure. Eden powered through filming despite morning sickness and long workdays under hot studio lights. She later admitted it was grueling, but she didn't want to risk losing the role. Audiences watching the early episodes never realized that Jeannie's twirls and smiles were performed by an actress balancing a baby bump. What audiences didn't know was that some of the most iconic shots of Eden in her pink outfit were filmed while she was expecting her first child. NASA hated the show's premise. Because the series centered on an astronaut who brings a genie back from a deserted island, many assumed NASA would appreciate the publicity. Instead, the space agency was furious. Officials felt the show made astronauts look unprofessional and unserious, undermining the image of the U.S. space program during the Cold War. NASA reportedly refused to cooperate with NBC or provide access to authentic footage. Sidney Sheldon brushed off the criticism, insisting it was comedy, not documentary. But tension remained, and astronauts themselves occasionally joked about having their own genies waiting at Cape Canaveral. What audiences didn't know was that the real space community despised the series for reducing their dangerous missions to a sitcom backdrop with a genie twist. The show avoided marriage for a reason. For 4 seasons, Jeannie and Tony danced around marriage, even as Jeannie desperately wanted it. Why? NBC and Sidney Sheldon believed the tension between Master and Jeannie was the show's engine. They worried that a wedding would kill the will they or won't they chemistry. Yet by season 5, network pressure and declining ratings forced a change. Tony and Jeannie tied the knot in a TV event. Fans expected the romance to deepen, but the opposite happened. Audiences lost interest almost immediately. Ratings dropped, and many believed the marriage storyline killed the show. Barbara Eden herself admitted Jeannie should never have married. What audiences didn't know was that the wedding wasn't a reward for viewers, but a desperate attempt to salvage falling numbers. And it backfired. Larry Hagman called the show a nightmare. Behind his million-dollar smile, Larry Hagman struggled with the series. He despised the scripts, hated the recycled special effects, and bristled at playing second fiddle to Barbara Eden's magical hijinks. By the later seasons, Hagman referred to the show as his 5-year nightmare. His frustration boiled over in bizarre ways. At one point, he locked himself in his dressing room for hours, refusing to film. The tension between Hagman and the producers grew so toxic that NBC briefly considered replacing him. Ironically, his bitterness made his next role as J.R. Ewing on Dallas all the sweeter, as he finally had the creative freedom and spotlight he craved. What audiences didn't know was that the astronaut they adored was secretly counting the days until blastoff away from the show. Jeannie's bottle almost burned down the set. The pink smoke effect when Jeannie appeared looked whimsical on screen, but behind the scenes, it was dangerous. To create the puff of smoke, the crew used a combination of dry ice and chemical powders inside Jeannie's bottle. During one shoot, the mixture ignited, sending sparks across the soundstage. Barbara Eden was inches away when it happened and later admitted it terrified her. Afterward, fire marshals required stricter safety checks, but the crew still pushed the limits to get the effect right. Ironically, the sequence that symbolized Jeannie's harmless magic nearly turned catastrophic. What audiences didn't know was that the bottle, meant to be cozy and mystical, was essentially a fire hazard sitting at the center of every episode. Jeannie's evil twin was invented out of panic. In Season 3, producers introduced Jeannie's brunette evil twin, also played by Barbara Eden. But this wasn't a planned twist. It was a desperate move to keep viewers engaged as ratings dipped. Sidney Sheldon hoped the evil twin trope would inject drama and give Eden more to play with. The crew even dyed Eden's hair darker to distinguish the characters. Audiences loved the contrast, and Eden enjoyed the chance to be wicked instead of perpetually bubbly. However, shooting both roles was exhausting, requiring careful split-screen tricks and hours of costume changes. What audiences didn't know was that Jeannie's twin wasn't part of Sheldon's grand design, but a last-minute gamble to keep the show afloat in an increasingly competitive TV landscape. The theme song almost didn't exist. The jazzy, playful I Dream of Jeannie theme music feels inseparable from the show today, but it didn't appear until Season 2. In Season 1, the series had no real theme, only generic background scoring. NBC executives finally pushed for a proper tune, and composer Hugo Montenegro delivered the now iconic melody. Ironically, Sheldon initially resisted, worried it would cartoonize the show. Yet once it aired, the song became so beloved that fans could hum it instantly. To this day, many people recognize the melody before they even remember the show's name. What audiences didn't know was that one of the most recognizable TV themes of the 1960s was nearly scrapped altogether, saved only because NBC wanted something catchier to compete with Bewitched. Barbara Eden did her own stunts. Though Jeannie was portrayed as magical, much of Barbara Eden's work was physical. She performed her own twirls, jumps, and sudden disappearances with the help of practical effects. On more than one occasion, she suffered bruises and scrapes from trapdoors and quick-set changes. During one scene where Jeannie popped in and out of her bottle, Eden landed awkwardly and sprained her ankle, forcing her to shoot several episodes in pain. Yet she rarely complained, determined to prove she was more than just a pretty face in costume. Eden later said, "I did whatever it took to make the magic believable." What audiences didn't know was that every twirl of smoke came at a cost, sometimes in the form of Eden's own injuries. The show was shot in a military hangar. Unlike most sitcoms filmed on standard sound stages, I Dream of Jeannie had a peculiar production home, a repurposed military hangar in California. The cavernous space gave the crew more room to build elaborate sets, including Jeannie's ornate bottle interior. But the hangar had one major problem: it wasn't soundproof. Airplanes from a nearby base often interrupted filming, forcing the cast to freeze mid-scene until the noise subsided. Larry Hagman reportedly lost his temper more than once when long takes were ruined. The irony: a show about an astronaut was filmed under the constant roar of real aircraft. What audiences didn't know was that the sitcom's biggest production headaches weren't magical at all. They were the jets flying overhead. The Jeannie bottle interior was a forced perspective trick. Audiences marveled at Jeannie's bottle interior, with its plush cushions, draped fabrics, and sparkling jewels. But the luxury palace was just a clever forced perspective set. The interior was built on a raised platform, with walls slanting inward to make the space appear larger than it was. Barbara Eden often complained about how cramped it felt. She had to crouch and contort her body to fit inside. Lighting was also a nightmare, since the set's small size caused shadows to bounce unnaturally. Still, with careful camera placement and editing, the illusion worked beautifully. What audiences didn't know was that the bottle wasn't a comfortable hideaway at all. It was a tiny, awkwardly shaped space where Eden often sweated under hot lights, pretending to lounge in Jeannie luxury. Sidney Sheldon wrote most scripts himself. Unlike many TV shows that relied on large writing teams, I Dream of Jeannie was largely powered by creator Sidney Sheldon. Frustrated with writers who didn't get his vision, Sheldon personally wrote or heavily rewrote nearly every script. This workload was immense. Sometimes he churned out entire episodes over a weekend to meet deadlines. He later confessed the pressure nearly broke him, though it trained him for his later career as a novelist. Sheldon's obsessive control gave the show its consistent tone, but also limited creative variety. What audiences didn't know was that the genie magic they loved was the product of one man burning the candle at both ends, desperately trying to keep NBC satisfied and the series afloat. The show faced backlash from feminist critics. While fans adored Barbara Eden's bubbly portrayal, some critics in the late 1960s viewed Jeannie as a problematic symbol. Feminist writers argued that the premise, an all-powerful woman serving a male master, reinforced outdated gender roles. Jeannie's constant jealousy and eagerness to please Tony Nelson fueled debates about sexism on TV. Eden herself defended the show, saying it was pure fantasy, but acknowledged the criticism. Interestingly, the controversy only grew after Jeannie married Tony. As critics argued, it turned a whimsical premise into domestic servitude. What audiences didn't know was that beneath the pastel comedy, I Dream of Jeannie stirred cultural arguments about women's roles in society, arguments still echoed today in modern reviews of the series. The cast struggled after cancellation. When the show ended in 1970 after 5 seasons, the cast wasn't prepared for how abruptly their careers would shift. Barbara Eden was typecast, struggling to find roles that didn't involve fantasy or comedy. Larry Hagman wandered in obscurity for years until Dallas made him a superstar. Bill Daly, who played Roger Healy, found success on The Bob Newhart Show, but he admitted he was always asked about Jeannie. The sudden end of steady paychecks also hit hard, as syndication royalties were minimal compared to modern contracts. What audiences didn't know was that behind the smiles of the finale, the actors faced years of career turbulence, carrying Jeannie's legacy like a blessing and a curse. The show nearly got a dark reboot in the 80s. In the early 1980s, NBC considered reviving I Dream of Jeannie, but with a darker twist. Executives toyed with the idea of a drama in which Jeannie faced the modern world after centuries in her bottle. Barbara Eden was approached but turned it down, fearing it would ruin the light-hearted charm of the original. Instead, NBC produced 2 reunion TV movies in the 1980s, which leaned heavily on nostalgia. Neither recaptured the magic, but they cemented Eden's place as Jeannie for an entirely new generation. What audiences didn't know was that Jeannie almost returned in a completely different, more serious form, an alternate timeline where the whimsical Jeannie story took a dramatic, somber turn. Jeannie's bottle went missing for decades. Here's the wildest secret of all. After the show ended, the original Jim Beam bottle used for Jeannie's home mysteriously disappeared from the studio lot. For years, fans and collectors speculated it had been destroyed or stolen. Then, in the 1990s, a prop collector revealed he had acquired it at a studio auction, but he didn't even realize its importance until Eden herself authenticated it. The bottle is now preserved as one of the most valuable props in television history. What audiences didn't know, for 2 decades, Jeannie's magical home sat forgotten, gathering dust, while fans wondered if it had been lost forever. I Dream of Jeannie wasn't just a sitcom about a genie and an astronaut. It was a battlefield of censorship, egos, stunts, and cultural clashes wrapped in pastel-colored fantasy. Its legacy endures because it reflects the strange contradictions of 1960s television: magical on screen, messy behind the curtain. If you enjoyed these secrets, hit that like button, subscribe, and share your favorite Genie memory in the comments. Because even decades later, the magic of Genie's bottle still hasn't run out.